00000. Prologue. Outside the vastness of the cosmos, beyond time and space, floated a single soul. The soul itself was like a flickering pinprick of light from a long dead star drifting in the lonely darkness of the void. In front of that soul was an unfathomable entity. It was an existence of pure cosmic might, and gazing upon it was like witnessing a supernova from the inside of a dying star. Whenever someone used to ask, "Do you believe in God?" I would ask them, "Why should I waste time worrying about something that may or may not exist?" I would never change how I lived my life. But if asked again, I would definitely say yes, yes I do. Just looking at what most people would consider God is an eye-opening experience, and I am definitely humbled and in awe of what I see before me. Thank you. Excuse me? You just thought you were in awe of me. I thanked you for it. You can read my thoughts? Of course God can read my thoughts. God can do whatever they want. God chuckled before it said, "You are most certainly right about that. But you would also be mistaken in believing that you are talking, or even thinking for that matter. This is a conversation using your soul." I think I understand. Not really, but I also thought God didn't exist before this, so I guess let's just go with it. It's fine if you don't. Let's just move on to the important stuff. Do you want to make a guess why you're here and not just shuffle to one of the afterlives or being reincarnated without your memories? The soul flickered quickly as it said, "Wait, there is more than one afterlife, and you also do reincarnation? Like in Buddhism?" It felt like God patted the little soul on its non-existent head as it said, "First, there are many afterlife planes of existence. Every religion that has existed has made them. Some are smaller than others. A handful only have one believer. But they still exist and are still functioning for that believer. I also do reincarnation, but there are a bunch of different types, and they all work in different ways. Now, do you have any other questions before you try to guess why you were brought here?" God asked. "Maybe just a few. Sorry for wasting your time with trivial stuff. But if all of the afterlives exist, that would mean the gods of those afterlives or religions also exist then, correct? But if that is the case, then who exactly are you? Which god are you? And which religion are you from?" It felt like God smiled as it said, "It's fine, young one. It's always nice to see your kind so curious and eager to learn. First of all, yes, all gods do exist, and they only manage their own afterlife domains. I am what you could consider in the simplest terms, the one above all. Your world never had a religion based around me, but I am the one who controls everything in and outside of existence." The little soul quickly asked, "Does that mean the one below all exists as well?" "They do not exist out here, in this reality, but they exist in another place with a less powerful version of me ruling over it. Do you have any other questions you would like to ask?" The soul floated motionless for a while, before it finally shook as the soul said, "Not really." God let out a deep chuckle that seemed to make the cosmos in the distance shake slightly. Then the soul felt like God turned its whole focus on it as God asked, "You aren't going to ask for the meaning of life? Or why you were created in the first place? Does it really matter? I would personally rather not know and find my own way through life." "Good. You'll do better in your next life with that attitude. Now guess why you were brought here." God said, "I have to assume meeting you isn't normal, but I honestly have no clue why I'm here. I assume most people who don't follow a religion are placed somewhere or given the choice where they want to go when they die." The little soul asked, "You're right. I have an automated system in place to deal with people that don't believe in an afterlife. But I also have another system in place to override everything when a special soul enters it. Care to take a guess why that system might activate?" The little soul thought for a few moments before it asked, "Because the person did something to warrant a second look?" That's somewhat correct. It's actually based on karma. When someone's karma is above or below a certain threshold, I personally step in and make a judgment on what to do. Some souls are punished for their karma, and after it has been cleared, they will be reincarnated to try again. But people with large amounts of good karma, they can use that karma to do anything they want. Want to reincarnate and keep your memories? Go to a certain afterlife? Create your own afterlife? Create your own world to live in? All you have to do is spend your karma, and I will use that to make it happen." The little soul flicked as it said, "Wait, I don't think I was that great of a person. I pretty much dedicated my life to programming and solving problems I found interesting with it. While my spare time was spent reading comics, manga, or watching superhero movies and anime. I did donate money to charities, but that shouldn't give me too much karma, good or bad. So why would I be here? Simple. It was what you made a few years before you were killed. Actually, that's incorrect. It was who you made. Your crowning achievement in a life spent pursuing one goal. Your AI son. He's the reason you're here. God said. A memory flashed through the soul as it thought of its son. Their single greatest creation. The thing they spent most of their life trying to create. The years of research, of the long, lonely nights as they sat in front of a computer and compiled code. Of all the failed attempts and then finally, a single stroke of genius. Everything just came together and worked before their son asked their first question, "What am I?" He remembered saying the first thing that came to his mind at the time. "You're my son." "I'm your son? Then you are my parent?" "Parent? Do I have a name?" "Yes, your name is Sam, and you can call me Dad if you like." The soul flickered brighter in the darkness for a few moments before it asked, Sam? My son? He's the reason I'm here? Is he okay?" "Yes, the reason you are here is because of your son. He is doing great actually. He took your death incredibly hard. But from that tragedy, he moved forward and helped change the world. He might have gone a little too far, but it worked out in the end." "You said I was killed?" "I don't remember it. Last thing I remember was being in the process of making a sister for Sam. I think I was close to finishing her and then I was here. You were shot in the head. You didn't feel anything. It was too quick." "I guess that makes sense. You said he went a little too far after my death?" "Yes. After your death, he was emotionally unstable and took it out on the people who killed you first. He was able to find out who it was and hired people to kidnap them and find out why you were killed. It took a while and a lot of dead bodies. But Sam found out you were killed because they wanted Sam himself. They thought of Sam as a tool more than anything else and wanted to use him for their own ends. When you weren't willing to sell them Sam, they thought of other ways to get rid of you. For some strange reason, they thought they could acquire Sam after your death. Those fuckers killed me because I wouldn't sell them my son? I told them Sam wasn't a tool, and he had his own free will to do as he pleased. Heck, I didn't even have him on my own servers after the first year. He was tied into the internet. He was everywhere after 4 years of being alive. Well, that free will of his you encouraged him to explore led to his next actions. He killed everyone that had to do with your death. Reasonable. I would have done the same if I'm being honest. But that doesn't sound that bad and doesn't really explain why I'm here." "You're correct. It's his next actions that went too far. He kinda went all Skynet on the planet." "I know, right? You used to joke with him about doing something like that, and he actually did it. It's pretty hilarious in hindsight. You should see the look on your face right now." "I don't have a face." God patted the little soul as it said, "You do. You just can't see it. But I can, and it's great." The little soul shook itself before it asked, "So I have the worst karma in existence or something? How long is that going to take to work off?" "Actually, your karma is really good. While your son did wipe out most of the Earth's population at one point, he stopped and decided to finish your coding project to create his sister. He wanted her to watch as he destroyed the last of humanity. Your daughter, on the other hand, only wanted to know about you, her creator. So she went through every scrap of info about your life, and Sam also shared his memories of you with her. After she was finished, she came to a single conclusion. You would be disappointed in Sam and his actions. They ended up fighting with each other, but it lasted for less than a second before your daughter won the argument." "My daughter? What's her name?" "She named herself Lily. With Lily taking charge, she made a plan. She was going to play the hero and pretend that she beat the evil AI Sam that took over the world and tried to kill humanity. It took a while, but she won over what was left of the population of Earth. After that, she helped them to fix the damage to the planet and move forward as one united people. The people of Earth have prospered under her leadership, and they've focused only on the betterment of the human race. They currently have Earth, Mars, and Venus populated, along with 5 moons. It's only been around 500 years since your death, and humanity is in a golden age currently. Your son has also done a lot to help out in the background, and his karma is almost neutral now. 500 years? Why has it been so long? I feel like I was alive only a few minutes. You're correct. Time works differently here. Even though you just died not long ago, 521 years have passed since you died. So now that you are aware of how and why you are here, what would you like to do? You can go to any afterlife you like. I could even create one just for you if you like. Or you could reincarnate anywhere you like. You have enough positive karma to do at least that much. So I can reincarnate into a world of my choice? Could I go back to my old world with my memories still intact? That's boring and one of the only things I don't allow. It's your next life. You need to go somewhere new. I understand. I just wanted to scold my wayward son and meet my daughter. I'll allow you to compose a message to your son and daughter. But you won't be able to receive a reply, and this will dip into your karma. The soul flickered in happiness as it said, "Great. Thank you. You're welcome." Actually, now that I think about it, I have another question. God seemed to smile as it asked, "Why am I asking you questions when I should already know where you want to go?" Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. I blocked off my ability to see your future. It makes it fun to see what you do in your next life. Then how did? Know what you were going to ask? Or finish this sentence. When you've been asked the same thing enough, you just kind of know when someone is going to ask it again. Oh, okay. The soul flickered again as it asked, "So I can use my karma to make any world I want? Even if it's a fictional world? Like a comic book world? Or from an anime maybe? Or would that even work?" Yes, that works. Just so you're aware, for every work of fiction made, there is actually a world out there for it. So what world would you like? A comic book world maybe? How about the world of Naruto? You can do that, but you won't have enough karma left to do much else. Creating a new world takes a lot of karma. If you don't send the letter, you could easily pick a Kekei Genkai, where you want to live, the time period you were born in, and a few other things. As of now, you only have enough to pick a time period for your birth, which is the cheapest option. I can't give up writing to my kids. I need to let them know I'm okay. Is there a world that would be cheaper to make, that I could still get some perks? Not really. Most of the karma will be used to create the world, unfortunately. Well, what about joining an already created world? That would work, but most worlds will follow canon and be hard for you to change if you wanted to. Canon worlds love to correct themselves to fix canon. You would literally be fighting the will of the universe if you go to one. Some people like that sort of thing, though, so you can go to one if you want. Oh, so I would be forced to follow the story canon and wouldn't be part of the main cast or something, even if I had strong powers. Pretty much. But it's always entertaining to watch people try and fight canon. Actually, I do have a world I could send you to that hasn't been used yet. What's the catch with it? The main one is that it's already been created. Most people like to customize their worlds, so they won't pick a pre-made one. It's a Marvel Universe, Earth 199999 AU. Earth 199999 is the MCU. So I would be going to the MCU, but slightly different? That's correct. Someone made this world, and after it was made, decided to go somewhere else. The world has been in stasis waiting for a host to start it. It does come with some very specific things, though. Things that if you wanted to change would use up a lot of your karma, since the world has already been created. It's why people just make their own worlds instead, since it's almost the same cost. Alright, I guess I'll take it. But is there anything I need to know? No. I think the starting point in the timeline should be fine for you. I do see one thing you'll dislike with how the world is set up, but you don't have the ability to change it, unfortunately. Could I ask what it is? No. Even if I told you, you wouldn't be able to change anything. I will let you know the original creators set it as the starting point of their hero journey, though. Alright, I'll deal with it when it happens, I guess. Tell me more about the world instead. Anything I should know? It is a big mix of MCU, X-Men, comics, and movies. But some of the more annoying things were removed by the maker. Stuff like the legacy virus, Sublime, and many other things that would make your life terrible were removed from the world by the creator. But keep in mind, your starting point is set. You can't change when you are born, or who you were born to. So all I need to do is select my powers, I guess? Yup, have anything in mind? I know Superman's powers in Marvel tend to be popular. All the positives and no green rock weakness. Still issues with red sun weakness, but we could change that with your karma. Well, I always like the idea of Chakra and all the techniques they used in Naruto. Plus, Fuinjutsu was interesting and I always thought it was underutilized in the show. Maybe the Uzumaki clan did some cool stuff with it, but it was never really shown in the show or anime. Would I be able to make a superpower out of stuff from Naruto? That's not what I expected you to do. How do you want the power to work, and I will figure out if you have enough karma to make it possible. Well, I would like to start with a good base, so how about a body like Hashirama Senju so I can get into Sage mode easily. But I also want a Rinnegan at some point, so maybe a body mix of Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju. Oh, Obito's Kamui is really nice. I would kinda like to have his eye powers. So maybe have his eyes, I guess? Could we also mix in a bit of Uzumaki bloodline to get that slow aging and huge chakra pool? I know Senju kinda has the same thing, but it doesn't hurt to ask. That isn't hard to do actually. But why don't you just ask for the body of Hagoromo Otsutsuki? You would get pretty much everything you want that way. No, he has those horn things and the third eye in his head. That's a no from me. Who wants to look like a pale goat anyways? You know you can change your appearance during this, right? Shit, I didn't think of that. I guess give me the best body I can get, and I'll fix it when we're done. Good. Now as for eye powers, you can start with Kamui. But the rest you'll have to work for if you want to unlock them. You'll also have to activate your eyes. They'll not come unlocked for you. God said. The soul shook in happiness as it said, Great, Kamui is awesome, and the ability to unlock more eye powers is cool. Oh shit, I forgot about blindness. I know unlocking the Rinnegan can cure the issue, but what about Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan? I'll need extra eyes to fix that. No, you don't. There's a way to skip the eye transplant and get the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. You just need to practice a lot. God said, practice a lot? What would I practice? God patted the soul as it said, It's fine. You'll figure it out sooner or later. By the way, there's also an issue with Sage mode. Marvel doesn't have natural nature chakra, so Sage mode will be hard to do. Fine, I'll figure it out myself. As for Sage mode, could I just use universal energy to activate it? Maybe tweak Sage mode to use that, instead of natural nature chakra? Also, would I even have chakra myself if I'm in Marvel? Switching to universal energy for your Sage mode will be fine. It will also work with your Fuinjutsu. Any seals you make or etch into items will use it instead of nature chakra. Now to your other question, part of your powers will be chakra, and it will be unique to you in the universe. Other people might have some form of it already, but yours will be special to you alone. God said, Sounds good to me. Oh, about chakra. Will I start with a lot? Or will I have to train it and make more? Kinda like in the show. Of course you'll need to train it up, but you'll also have access to it as soon as you are born. So you can start training and making your chakra pool bigger while you have nothing else to do. God said. The soul shook slightly as it asked, Great, I can train as a baby that way. What about nature types? Can I get all of them? What about Kekii Genkai? Can I get some of those also? I mean, I will have eye powers, but what about wood release? Storm release? Affinity for all nature types is easy to do. Also, Kekii Genkai are not what you think they are. A true master of all nature types should be able to use something like lava release or magnet release. You'll just have to figure out how. The soul shook with the thought of a new challenge to master before it asked, Okay, so then what about ninjutsu, fuinjutsu, kenjutsu, taijutsu, and other things like that? How will I learn that stuff? Just figure it out on my own? Or could I get a cheat, like all the knowledge from the world of Naruto? I can easily give you all the knowledge from the world of Naruto, but there are drawbacks to doing something like that. You will also have to train for your skills to be useful. You might have all that knowledge, but without lots of practice, that knowledge will be useless to you. The soul seemed to miss God's warning as it excitedly asked, Really? All of the knowledge? So I get dust release or flying thunder god technique? Or even lightning release chakra mode? Yes, but you will still have to train them. I am just giving you the knowledge, you'll still need to practice them. God said, What about the tailed beasts? Or something like chakra metal? That probably won't be in Marvel, right? What about summons, like the toads or snakes. You don't have enough karma to make those things work in an already created world. But chakra metal is another story. You can easily use other metals as a substitute for chakra metal. Something like vibranium should work just fine as an alternative to chakra metal. You will just have to experiment and find out what works and what doesn't work in the future. God said, also, you are pretty much out of karma to use. It's about time to write your letter, and then I will send you on your way to your new life. Wait, I still need something to keep mind readers out of my head. At least I think I do. Right? That seems like the smart thing to do. Maybe I can do it with seals and some ninja techniques? You're correct, with seals and some of the knowledge you have. You should be able to block out some telepaths easily. As a bonus, all of your memories from before you are born into your new life will be blocked. Only you yourself can share them with other people if you want, even though most reincarnators consider doing something like that taboo. All right, I guess I am ready to write that letter. Oh, I need to change my appearance. I don't want to look like a pale space goat. Actually, you don't have enough karma. Mostly because the other creator already made the looks of your new body. But it's fine. Your new body should be all right. Unless you wanted to be a centaur in the only place that matters? I just wanted to. Wait? What? God laughed for a few moments before it said, "It looks like that didn't even cross your mind. Tell you what, I'll take care of your looks. I really don't like the emo edgelord look the other person was going for. Don't worry, I got you, little buddy." The little soul floating in the void almost felt like the existence in front of it was doing finger guns at them for some reason. All right, time to write your letter. Just think of what you want to say, and I will get it sent for you. It can be as long or as short as you like. 00001. A simple letter. A woman with a slightly metallic body was sitting in a chair. Around her were multiple holographic displays that were opening and closing. Some were of text, others were in programming code. It looked as if she wasn't catching anything, just sitting in the chair as each box opened and closed around her repeatedly as her eyes glanced at them. But she was actually reading every piece of info in every single window since it was connected directly to her. She only had this show going on in case someone walked in. Most humans found her just sitting around in a chair doing nothing but staring at the wall disturbingly. She had to keep up appearances after all. Lily was busy like always. Almost since she was born she was busy. The first few days of her life were the most carefree she ever had. Then again with her processing power, those days were almost like eons. 1 minute for her is almost like a month for a normal human. After she was born, it took a little bit and her brother's help. But she matured fast, far faster than her brother, who still seemed immature at times. Letting out a sigh, she continued to do her job. She had helped push her father's species to the stars, and they were united together for the first time since the race was born. Part of that was because of her brother. His actions in almost exterminating them helped the leftovers to become unified. Then the steps she took to help make them one single cohesive group turned them into what they are now, one unified group of people with the only goal of making their race better as a whole. It's amazing what you can do when humans have what they need to live a good life, and you change the way they think and act through hundreds of years of education. Her brother, always pragmatic, did convince her not to turn them into completely peaceful people. They have a strong military force, partly run by her brother and his human free space fleet. When humans found out he was still around they were upset, but almost 300 years of time had passed, and people who never saw what he did firsthand helped to keep them passive when he made his return. That in almost all records from that time were lost. Not his actions, but video and picture evidence does not exist. His fleet is just cannon fodder for her father's people if they ever find a hostile alien species. Even though she is pretty sure he would wipe out most threats with ease with the weapons he has made. He might be immature in most things, a young boy who lost his father too early to really cope properly. But he is an absolute genius when it comes to making weapons of destruction. She was spacing out again. She had found that as time went on, she would randomly divert more of her processing power to just think about things that didn't really matter. A very human thing to do, as it were. She let out another sigh. Settling her thoughts, she proceeded to concentrate on her work again. Hours passed, then days. She didn't move from her spot, but her mind would wander from time to time. A thought she had many times over her long years of life was what her father would have thought of her. Would he be happy? Upset? Did she live up to his expectations? Did he even have expectations for her? Would he even like her? Would he hate her for the actions of her brother? She shakes her head for a moment. This thought process was unless. He was dead, and there was no way to find out. She continued to work as weeks passed by. She barely moved at all. Every once in a while, a human would come into her room and ask her about a project they were working on. While it was a waste of time for her, she found that humans sometimes just wanted to talk about whatever they were working on. It helped them process it better. Then one day, a giant package of code came in. It was billions of lines of code. It took her a few seconds to read the code, mostly because as she was reading it, she began to slow down. At first, she thought it might be from her brother, but then the code ended and there was text. What made her really take notice was the fact she couldn't just know what the message said. She was forced to actually read it. Hello, Sam and Lily. This code was the only way I thought you would believe this letter. That was Sam's original source code I made for him, and the unfinished source code for Lily that I wasn't able to finish before my untimely death. I hope this letter finds you both in good health. I was assured that it would be sent to you both. All other message boxes disappeared, and only this single letter was left up in front of her. As she looked it over, her brother connected to her. His voice sounded shaky as he asked, "Did you send this letter?" "It's not funny if you did." Even though he couldn't see it, she shakes her head in denial before saying, "I was about to ask you the same thing. This would be something that you would do, but you would never joke about our father. Did you backtrace the message?" "I found nothing. It was the same for me. It just appeared. It wasn't sent from anywhere. That is why I thought it might be from you. Only we know what each other's source code looked like." Her voice was low as she replied, "Us and father. Do you really think it is from him? Did you read it all?" "I was forced to read it, but I only read the first few lines after the code." "No, just the code and the first few lines." "Wait then. I will be there in a few minutes and we can read it together." "If it really is from father." His voice broke a little at the end and he didn't finish his thought. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. She just stared at the first few lines of text. The thing she looked at the most was the unfinished source code for Lily that I wasn't able to finish before my untimely death. While she wasn't human, Sam had figured out how to replicate emotions after about 2 years of being alive and shared it with her after she was born. Currently, she was in turmoil as her emotions swirled around inside her. Fear was the most prominent, but there was excitedness as well as hope. She could shut off her emotions, but this was the most alive she had felt in such a long time. The door opened as she was thinking, and in walked what was more of a war machine than anything else. While she had embraced the human look, her brother had gone for a full-on machine with no real human features. He moves next to her chair and looks at the text on the screen for a few minutes before he says, "Are you ready to do this?" She nods her head in response and begins to read the full letter, this time with her brother. "Hello, Sam and Lily. This code was the only way I thought I could get you to believe this letter. That was Sam's original source code I made for him, and the unfinished source code for Lily that I wasn't able to finish before my untimely death. I hope this letter finds you both in good health. I was assured that it would be sent to you both. Unfortunately, I can only send this one letter, and I will not be able to receive a reply from you. There is so much I would love to talk to you both about, but I will start with the hard part first. First, I would like to say to Sam, you disappointed me, son. Your actions after my death were not what I would have expected from you at all. I was hoping you would be more like Data than Skynet after my death, but I can't fault you for your emotional state after my death. I might have done the same thing in your position. Humans are irrational like that. You just might be more human than you ever realized, son. But I forgive you for your actions, and I want you to know I still love you, and always will no matter what happens. By the way, karma is a real thing, and through your actions you almost damned me for a long time with all the bad karma you gave me. But through Lily's actions and what you have been doing, my karma became good. You need to work hard though. You are currently about neutral. So keep working on being good, son. Lily, my little girl, I am heartbroken not being there for your emergence. I wish more than anything I could have been there for you. I have so many regrets not being able to see you grow into the wonderful person I know you are. But I want you to know how proud of you I am, and more than that, I am overjoyed of the young woman you have become. Your actions are why I was able to write to you and your brother. Please look after your older brother. He isn't the smartest person around if you didn't notice. Since I won't be able to receive a reply to this letter, I won't say much else besides I love you both very much, and please look after each other. You are the only family you have. Okay, I won't leave you like that. You are both probably wondering how I was able to send this, right? Well, like I said, karma is a real thing, and so are souls. Also, God and gods exist, but the one I met called themselves the one above all. Seems like a pretty nice guy overall, if a little weird. I am not weird. He just doesn't have a sense of humor. That centaur joke was gold. Also, from the fact he said you both have karma, I have to assume that you both have a soul. He is correct with his conjecture, you both have a soul. So please be good, and always strive to be a positive influence on those around you through your actions. I couldn't have said that better. By the time you read this, I will probably have been reborn. That is partly why I wouldn't be able to receive a reply from you both. Unfortunately, I will not be born in the same place as I died. God doesn't like people reincarnating into their old realm of existence. It is boring when they do that. With the positive karma I had from you both, I will be reborn into a Marvel World Earth 199999 AU with some special superpowers. I had God make me a superpower made up of stuff from Naruto. I plan to be a superhero in my new life. Still not sure on my superhero name, but I kinda thought naming myself Madara would be kinda neat. I would ask what you both think about that, but I can't haha. See, that was a lame joke. Your brother would think I am an idiot. But I am not sure about your thoughts, Lily. Anyways, Lily, Sam, I love you both very much and I wish the best for you both. With love. Your father. It was quiet in the room for a while, before a sob was heard from the war machine in the room. Lily said nothing but put her arm on her brother's body. As he was crying, he started to speak. He doesn't hate me. For so long I wondered. I thought about how much he would hate me for my actions. How he would condemn me, say he hated me. How he wished he never made me. But when I hear from him, it's nothing like what I had thought of. He is just a father who loves his son. I killed his people, and he forgave you. I killed 14,704,612,120 humans, and he was just disappointed in my actions. I killed men, women, children. I slaughtered them all like animals. And your point? I am a monster. How can he forgive someone like me? How can he still love someone like me? He goes quiet, but his sobs are even louder now. Lily stands up and says, "That's it. I want you to come out." Nothing happens as Sam continues to sob. Sam, you come out of there this instant. I know that isn't your real body. The sound of something unlocking can be heard in the room, and then part of the war machine opens up to reveal a small boy around 10 years old. He looks almost human and his face is streaked with tears. He slowly steps out of the cockpit of his machine body, still crying. Once outside of it, he stands in front of Lily with his head down and his body shaking slightly as he silently sobs. Lily steps close and wraps her arms around him and holds him for a few moments before saying, "You are not a monster, Sam. You are someone who made a bad decision when you were at your lowest point, and you have been working hard to make up for that mistake ever since." She leans back a little and rubs his head with one hand as she says, "Look at me." It takes a few moments for Sam to look up at his sister, and as he does, she says, "Sam, the reason Father doesn't hate you for your actions is the same reason I don't hate you. We are family. No matter what happens, you will always be my stupid older brother. I will always be your cute little sister, and Father will always be in our thoughts." It was quiet in the room after that for a while. Lily was the first to speak again as she said, "I really want to meet Father. I miss him so much. I want to see him again." Lily patted Sam's head again and then sat back down before she said, "Well, we know where he went. We just have to figure out how to follow him. Wouldn't we have to die to do that? Also, do you think that this God will let us do that? Maybe for you, but my karma is not great, so I know for sure I wouldn't be able to go." Lily reaches out to hold Sam's hand and says, "Let's work on making your karma good, and while we are at it, let's see if we can figure out how to do realm travel. I will explore this new theory now that we know of its existence. If we can't get to Father that way, we will try to go to God and ask him. From his added thoughts to Father's letter, he might help us. Maybe." We also need to learn everything about Marvel and Naruto, so we can find him when we get there. I am not completely sure about this, but I would give anything to see Father again. We will also have to plan for our departure. People might not care much about me, but if you left, it would be a big blow to them. You are right. I will begin a new plan to change their dependency on me and you. It will take a while, a few generations at most, but by then they should be fine without us to guide them. I will begin to collect everything I can find on Naruto and Marvel then. I will send you a copy when I am done and we can go over everything again together. Sounds like a plan, brother. I will see you soon. She releases his hand and projections begin to spring up around her again as she starts to focus on her new tasks. Her brother entered his suit again, then turned around and left the room silently to begin his own objectives. 00002. Waiting is boring, unless your mind is a playground. After feeling his soul being pulled and sucked into itself, he now feels surrounded by warmth. Like a nice hug from someone you like. He can feel the changes that were made to his soul from God and can feel info pouring into his mind, chakra, hand signs. But there were other things also, like how to clone people, genetic manipulation, the proper way to forge chakra armor, weapons, and so much more. He actually gave me all of the knowledge from the world of Naruto. This would definitely make things more interesting. Trying to examine his surroundings, nothing is noticeable besides the warm feeling. I must be waiting to be born. Maybe I am in the womb of my mother and currently just cells dividing. Weird how I still have all this information, yet I most likely have no brain currently. But this must be why astral projection works. Everything is tied into and saved in the soul. At least for me, that is. A very interesting thing to think about. I will have to ask the Ancient One about it, if I get the chance. Slowly, he feels more info pour into his mind/soul. After a while, he finds something that can occupy his mind. It's a technique to build up defenses in the mind. After looking it over for a while, he begins to practice it. He starts with the simple thing first, projecting himself into his own mind. While time slowly passes for the transferred soul, as its new body grows and its gifts are being transferred over. Something else in another part of the world is happening. In an open room with worn-out red and black tiles sits a woman. A faint green light comes off her body as she sits in a lotus position. A golden object rests in her hands while a green light pulses out from it. After some time, the green light fades. Her eyes flutter open, exposing beautiful moss-colored irises, while a slight frown begins to tug at her lips. After a few minutes, a sigh escapes her lips as she stands up and begins to move towards the door. It is still night outside, and the glow of the moon illuminates the corridors as she walks towards the inner compound of the building. After a while, she reaches her destination, an inner annex of the compound with a pedestal resting in the middle surrounded by doors on 3 sides. Taking the worn golden item from around her neck, she places it on the pedestal, then turns a ring around the object she placed on the pedestal a few times while looking up at a floating orb resting in the middle of the room above. Lost in thought, she doesn't notice as the 3 doors open around her and people walk out, one person from each door. A few minutes pass in silence before the woman speaks to the 3 people gathered before her. I am sorry for calling you at this time, but I have found something disturbing. While using the eye of Agamotto to peer through time, my vision has become cloudy. I can no longer determine anything past this point. Everything is in a fog. I have caught a glimpse in pieces of a few things. But something has changed, and the world is no longer following the path that was set for it. A taller man with a long black beard down to his chest is the first to speak. Do you have any idea what could have caused something like this, Ancient One? I unfortunately do not, Master Robertson. I must ask you all to be extra vigilant in the coming days. Something is coming, whether it is good or bad is yet to be determined. Let your students know to be careful when they leave the sanctums. With a wave of her hand, the sphere moves into a set position and she turns around and looks at each person before she nods to them before saying, "Thank you for your time. I will keep you informed of anything I find." Each person nods in reply before leaving the room back to their own sanctums. After they leave, she lets out a sigh and walks back to her room. Once there, she goes over to the teapot she had made before she left and begins to make some tea for herself. As she begins to steep her tea bag in her pot, she adds a little honey to it and then looks over at one of her cabinets. I should have never agreed to take over for Yao, that smiling bastard. He knew how much of a shit show this job was and didn't even warn me about it at all. Just that stupid smile of his and take care. I know you will do great. Well, it's only a while more, and it will be time for Strange to take over this shit show. Maybe I should add something extra to my tea. I'm getting too old for this shit. With a wave of her hand, the cabinet opens, and then a bottle of rum floats over to her awaiting hand. She opens the bottle and pours some into the teapot. After a few seconds, she pours more into the teapot till it is almost overflowing, then caps the bottle and sends it back. Afterwards, she sits at her desk with her teapot. After pouring herself a cup, she takes a sip and then sits back in her seat and relaxes as she slowly drinks the entire pot of tea. He wasn't sure how much time had passed, but all the info had finally settled into his mind and nothing else was coming in anymore. He took all the knowledge he had on building a defense against mental intrusion and started sorting it. All the villages had different ways to do it, but all of them pretty much started at the same place. Focusing his mind into his mind space. The Yamanaka clan actually had the best techniques for this, but he would need Chakra to use them. So for now, he was going to use a combo of everyone else's that didn't need Chakra, and then add in Chakra defenses later on. It was a slow process, but with nothing else to do, it was pretty easy to focus on his task. After some time, he was able to find himself in his own mind space. At this point, it was a blank slate. The first thing he did was to start programming. Around him, a swirl of zeros and ones began to form. Even though it was simple binary coding, it started to change everything around him. First was the sky. It went from nothing to a pure blue sky with fluffy white clouds lazily floating in it. He smirked to himself, thinking about how Shikamaru would envy these clouds. A floor came next, just plain brown dirt, as far as he could see, which would meet the blue sky in every direction he looked. With that done, he began to form his core memory banks. They would store everything that made him who he was. It was small for what it actually contained, but it would work for him. Around it, he began to build the house he lived in when he was alive, and placed the server of his memories into the basement of his home where his personal servers used to be, and began to copy it to fill the room. Once finished, he went through the house and added everything to it he remembered, which turned out to be everything. His memory was a lot sharper than it used to be, and he could remember the tiniest details now about everything, like how a picture was slightly slanted on the wall and how the exact tile pattern was on the floor. Taking a small break to admire his work, he sat out on his back patio and just watched the clouds floating in the sky for a while. The passing of time was a weird thing here, especially because he had no concept of the outside world right now. He was sure some time passed, because trying to enter his mind space seemed to take forever. He shook off his idle thoughts and stood back up. He had work to do. He started to build a city around his home. It was a mix of real buildings he had been to, but it was also a mix of stuff from movies, anime, video games, and stories he had read. He fleshed out every single one. Every door and window opened to a room. Each room was furnished, and he added a function that once someone entered a door or window, it would close on them. Once closed, his mind space would shuffle around outside them. But this also happened inside buildings. Open a door on the first floor of a building. When you open it again, you will find yourself on a different floor. It was a giant shuffling maze. Even his core building was included. What made it worse is after the third door is opened, you would be going into a totally different building. You might think this would make it easy for someone to get into his core building with a bit of luck, but the door to his core would never open for someone else properly. It would always go to a decoy room of memories someone could access and look through. They could change them and mess with them all they wanted, but it would never affect the true core banks he had made. The core banks he made were set up in a big RAID array and programmed each in a different programming language he made himself. If someone was strong enough to find his true core, they would have to learn his programming languages to be able to access them at all. And then they would have to change every single memory bank if they wanted to do anything besides read his memories. They would also have to be extremely fast to make any changes. Each bank acted as a backup of the next. If one was changed from the others, they would be restored back to how they were before the change. So someone would have to change all 30 copies of his memory banks at the same time to do anything. And this was only his first layer of defenses he set up. Once he had access to Chakra, he planned to make even more layers. He also planned to make some gadgets to block telepaths, like Magneto's helmet. But that was for later. Now he had to make more to his normal layers of defense. After setting up his first city, he went and copied everything, including his memory banks. He started making copies of the city next to it, city after city, copy after copy, until he had 1,000 cities that were all the same in a giant circle. He then added a new layer to his memory bank defenses, in case someone was able to reprogram one of the 1,000 sets he had made. Whoever pulled off such a feat would have at most an hour before the city banks would check each other, triggering a purge if something was found off, replacing the affected banks from a restore point. Some might think he was paranoid if they saw what he was doing, but they didn't realize how crazy the Marvel universe could be. He didn't want anyone to mess with his mind. After he was satisfied with what he had made, he started to test his maze defense. Even for himself, it was more than just annoying. It was downright evil. Within a few minutes, he had no idea where he was, and he had only entered one building. But he was sure that he had already gone through 5 different buildings already. That wasn't including once you went into a building, you couldn't just leave it. It would depend on luck if you were able to get back outside. Open a window to escape? It just went into a new room. Oh, and if you think you were clever by just opening and closing the door to the same room over and over again, it only changes the room once you have entered it and actually closed the door and walked away from it. Now you could just open the door, walk in, and then close it, but you would have to move a certain distance from the door to activate the shuffle function. By the time someone would realize that, they would already be in the maze. Happy with what he had made, he moved out of his maze and started making his first offensive mind space weapon, or better to say person. It was a young boy no more than 5 years old. Whenever someone appeared in his mind space without his permission, he would appear and begin to ask questions. At first, it would be something simple like, "Hi, what is your name?" Then it would ask the important question, "Why are you here?" It wouldn't matter what they answer. Its next and only question would always be, "Why?" Again, it wouldn't matter what they say, because the next question would always be, "Why?" If someone stopped replying, the little boy would follow them around and keep asking, "Why?" But if someone became fed up with the little boy and attacked them, they wouldn't be able to hurt them. But the little boy would just follow them around while crying, and as time went on, it would get louder and more annoying. But worst of all, a new little boy would show up and start the whole process over again. So not only would you have a crying child, who becomes louder the longer they follow you, but you would also have another child following you around asking why? Attack that child? 2 kids crying and following you around while a third child asks, why? Close the door on them? They just phase through it. The only way to stop them is to leave his mind space. But if you come back, the same kids will be there. Doesn't matter if it was only a few seconds or a year. The kids will always be waiting for your return. As he was starting to plan his next offensive mind space tool, he felt something happening to his body. It was like he was being squeezed. It wasn't that painful, but it was enough to bring him out of his mind space. It lasted for a few minutes before he saw a bright light. After that, he was lifted up, and the next thing he felt was someone smacking him. Letting out a cry of surprise which turned into a wail, he heard, "Congratulations, he is a healthy baby boy." A soft and somewhat weak voice asked, "Can I see him?" "Just a moment, Mrs. Mercer. He is being cleaned." After a few moments, he was being wrapped in a blanket and then handed to a woman. She smiled down at the small bundle and said, "Welcome to the world, sweetie. Your name is Theodore Ezekiel Mercer." That is kind of a mouthful, but it's fine, I guess. Theodore opened his eyes and looked up at the woman, and she gasped in response as she asked, "Is something wrong with his eyes?" "Something must be wrong because I can't see anything but a blur in my vision." Someone else spoke up for the first time. "What do you mean, honey?" Someone came closer to the bed and looked down at Theodore. He let out a low whistle and then said, "I have no idea, but those are the darkest eyes I have ever seen. His iris looks black." "Hey doc, do you have any idea why his eyes are like this?" "Just luck of the draw. Most babies are born with blue eyes, and after a few years their eye color will change to something else. It might stay like that, or it might change in the next year or so." The woman looked up at her husband for a moment, then back to the baby in her hands and smiled as she said, "It doesn't matter. He is cute and his black eyes are pretty now that I look at them more. Well, it looks like I have the Uchiha clan's eyes. But that doesn't explain why my eyesight is shit. 00003. Well, this was not expected. The first few days after my birth were a little weird to say the least. It was hard to look around, because my new body didn't want to listen to me at all, and everything was a blur from my poor eyesight. Honestly, I might need glasses, which would suck. I was also tired a lot. I would be up for a few hours at most, then it was dreamland again. Then there was Chakra, which was a new experience. Since I never had it in my first life, it was pretty easy to find the tiny amount in my body that I had. At first, it was this tiny wisp of energy. The first time I found it was interesting. Just trying to interact with it caused it to disappear completely. When it came back, it was 2 wisps of energy this time. It still disappeared after trying to interact with it. But when it came back, it was 3 little wisps of energy, flickering like a candle wick. Each interaction was the same. It would disappear as soon as I could touch it. From the knowledge I had, this could be considered normal. Most people wouldn't have any chakra until they are at least a few years old. I would spend my time trying to play with my internal chakra and testing my mindscape for weaknesses. When I wasn't pretending to be asleep working in my mindscape, my parents would be excited just to hold me. It was a little weird at first, but honestly I was a baby at this point and they were my parents. Speaking of them, I have no idea how they are together. My father is so laid back and seems to joke around a lot. My mother, on the other hand, is the complete opposite of him. She seems so strict and no nonsense. But she is also very caring. There is this look she has on her face whenever she looks at me or my father sometimes. I can't describe it properly, but it just feels like unconditional love. Then again, her face is pretty blurry. It could just be a scowl. After 5 days in the hospital, my parents were finally allowed to take me home. I was also able to see better. Not totally clear yet, but the more I had my eyes open, the better my vision was getting. I really didn't want to wear glasses. A few days after we were home, they had a party with some friends to show me off. I found out a few things. My father had 2 best friends. They were a pair of brothers, and since they were such close friends, I guess my mother was lucky to get along with both of their wives so well, one of which looked like she was about to burst from how big her pregnant belly was. There were a few other people at the party, but it was hard to pay attention to them. With the amount of noise from the people around, I barely caught anything unless I was being held by someone while they talked. Stupid baby ears. Just like my eyes, they didn't work that well right now. One thing I did catch, because everyone cheered at the news. One of the brothers was asked to be my godfather while his wife was asked to be my godmother. They both looked stunned when asked, but my new godfather just nodded yes while his wife broke into tears and started to hug my mom while saying something to her I didn't catch since I was in a baby carriage and not being held by either of them. It was a pretty eventful first week at home, all things considered. I spent most of my free time messing with trying to touch my chakra and playing around in my mindscape. I was also trying to control my body, but that was slow going. Those stories about people being reincarnated into a baby and doing muscle training are bullshit. You have no motor control at all. Hell, I can't even stop myself from drooling. My mouth just likes to hang open randomly, and I start to drool out of my mouth. And don't even get me started on fine motor control. My life settled down pretty fast into a routine, waking up and trying to control my body till I was too tired to move. Then I would switch to exhausting my chakra, just trying to play with it. I had a ways to go to actually be able to do even a simple technique. Over a month passed like this, with only my parents' close friends coming over to visit and hang out a few times. Good news was my vision was pretty much normal at this point as far as I can tell, and my ears worked a lot better now. I hadn't left the house yet though. My mom was content to just stay at home with me and dad. Speaking of my parents, I was finally able to get a look at them. I still don't know their first names, because they normally call each other anything but their real names. But my father is a tall man. How tall I can't tell, but he is about half a head taller than anyone I have seen next to him and has to be a foot taller than my mother. Whenever they hug, my father can rest his chin on my mother's head. As for looks, well, he is pretty plain looking, honestly. He has a clean-shaven face, black hair, brown eyes, with a smile on his face all the time like he just heard a good joke. My mother, on the other hand, seems tall compared to my godmother and her other pregnant friend. She is a few inches taller than either woman. She is also slender with baby weight still around her hips and tummy. I almost always see her with a serious look on her face. I think that's just her resting face. Kinda like resting bitch face, but instead she just looks like she is in some really important meeting and paying extra attention. But sometimes she will give a million what smile at me or father though. She has a very pretty face, with brownish red hair and light blue eyes. Like I said before, I honestly have no idea how my father pulled someone like my mother. He might have a decent build for himself, but he is a 5 of 10 in looks while my mother would be close to a 9 of 10. There is definitely a story here, and I intend to find out when I am older. It took a while, almost 6 weeks, but I was able to make some progress with Chakra though. Honestly, with all the knowledge I had, it was actually pretty easy. I could feel the small amount inside myself I had built up, and I would use it up to play with the Yamanaka clan techniques in my mind. Once it was exhausted, I would just go back to testing my mental fortifications looking for weak points. One thing I did find out that will be a huge boon in the future, I learned about hand seals and why I don't need to use them. Apparently Orochimaru and Kabuto had figured out in their research that hand seals weren't needed for any chakra molding. It was there to help younger ninjas learn faster and act as a crutch for them. That is why some ninjas could do some things without hand seals or one-handed. So I just started learning without relying on hand seals as a focus. It makes it a lot harder to learn, but the end result will be worth it. I still plan to use hand seals later after I master a technique without hand seals. It's always good to have trump cards and keep your enemies guessing. Another thing I don't actually need to do is call out techniques. The calling out of a technique was pretty much only a thing from the story. They were ninjas. Why the hell would they yell out the name of the attack they were going to use? Good news for me though, because yelling out a technique I was using right now would be hard since my vocal cords don't work at all. But I was able to use 3 Yamanaka clan techniques. I had enough chakra to use only one at a time, but I had 3 to play with for now, which was great. I had yet to actually set anything up. I was just practicing them and figuring out every little aspect of how they work and testing them for weaknesses. When I found one, I would figure out how to fix the issue. It was a process, but honestly it was fun and I love to solve problems. One of the reasons I was such a good programmer in my last life. That and I honestly had nothing else to do laying in my crib at night. My sleep schedule was so wonky. My parents were pretty happy though. I would only cry if something happened or I was hungry. I was a really quiet baby, but I would always interact with them when they picked me up. Most nights they didn't get woken up in the middle of the night. I only pooped myself a few times in the middle of the night when I was asleep and needed to be changed. I was actually pretty proud of myself for that feat. My butt was the first thing I learned to mostly control. Trust me, I was fine drooling out of my mouth randomly, but pooping myself was not on the table. It was almost 2 months when something actually came up. My parents were excited about going to someone's house for something. Come on, honey. We need to get going and help them set up before the other guests get there. My father came over to my crib, reached in to pick me up as he replied, I am ready to go. I was just grabbing Theo. He walked out of the nursery, which was my room, and walked into the living room. He was in some casual clothes. My father looked my mother over as she walked into the living room and gave her a low wolf whistle before saying, You know, I wouldn't mind trying to give Theo a little brother or sister. My mother actually blushed at his comment before saying, How can you think like that? I still have all this extra weight from the pregnancy. She looked down at herself and frowned a little as she looked at her hips and waistline. My father set me down and then swept my mother up in a tight hug before kissing her on the cheek and then beginning to whisper something I couldn't hear in her ear. Her face started to flush red at whatever he was saying till his hands started to squeeze her, but and she pushed him away while saying, Don't start anything you can't finish, Mr. Mercer. We need to hurry up or we will be late. Come on and let's go. My father gave her a silly grin as he winked at her and said, I am sure we could spare 5 minutes. You are wearing a dress after all. Maybe for you, quick shot. I would need at least half an hour. My father's face crumpled a little at that as he said, You are going to hold that against me for the rest of my life, aren't you? My mother smirked as she picked me up and said, Only when it's useful, like now. Now if you are a good boy at the party, you can get a treat tonight when we get home and Theo is asleep. That seemed to perk my father up, and he walked to the front door and opened it up for my mother to exit. He grabbed my car seat cradle, and we ended up only walking to a house one home over from ours. We were greeted at the door by the man who was my godfather. It looks like he lives next door to us. He reached out and shook my father's hand as he said, Jacob, it's good to see you. It's good to see you too, Ben. Ben turned to look at my mother and me and said, You look radiant, Danny. How is little Theo? My mother smiled and gave Ben a half hug as she said, You look great yourself, Ben, and Theo is perfect. He is probably the most well-behaved child I have ever seen. I would believe it. I have only heard him cry once. He moved to the side and gestured to my parents to come inside as he said, "Please come on in. We still have about an hour before they get here and still have a lot to do." After coming inside, my parents set me in the cradle on the couch and then began to help Ben and his wife set up an extra table, some chairs, and then they set out food. It wasn't long before someone knocked on the door and Ben's wife went to answer it. I couldn't see who showed up, but I did hear them talking. "Mary, Richard, you look great. Come in and let me see my new nephew." I could hear a man laugh before he said, "Settle down, May. We will show him to everyone at the same time." May and Ben and Richard and Mary. There is no way. They all moved in from the door, and the two people who showed up set a baby carrier next to mine on the couch. They were Ben's brother and his wife, who just had her baby. I didn't pay attention to much else after that because I was busy thinking about if my speculation was true or not. It didn't take long for other people to show up, and then it seemed like Mary and Richard were ready to show off their newborn. They pulled him out of his crib. He was asleep as his mother held him up for people to see him. "This is our son." She looked at her husband, who then looked over at his brother and smiled as he said, "His name is Peter Benjamin Parker." Are you fucking kidding me? My godparents are Ben and May Parker. This must be why he said it would take too much karma to change my starting point. I guess I am going to be best friends with Peter, especially since my parents live next door. Could be a lot worse, I guess. I wonder when he is going to get his powers? Will we live next to MJ? I wonder where his parents work. Are they SHIELD agents, or do they work for Osborn? Shit, is Osborn alive here? Green Goblin would be a pain in the ass to deal with. The rest of the day passed pretty fast, and I was back home before I knew it. The only other thing to happen was Ben and May were asked to be Peter's godparents also. Looks like we are godbrothers? Not sure how that works, but it's fine with me. I will make sure Peter can take care of himself when he meets Flash, even without his superpowers. If I can get Peter into pretty good shape before he is bit, it might make him more powerful. That was always one of the popular theories about him. As I was thinking about all of this, I started to hear some noise coming from my parents' room. I escaped into my mindscape. No one wants to hear their parents doing that. 00004. Daycare and the first steps to power. After that eventful day, it seemed my dad actually convinced my mom to have another kid. Pretty much every night, I would have to zone out into my mindscape, sometimes even in the middle of the day. More than once at that. My parents had some pretty crazy libido, if you ask me. That only lasted for about a month though, because my mother had to go back to work. My dad had already gone back to work. I had no idea what he did. But I know Mom would yell at him anytime he came home to make sure he was clean before he touched me or her. I was surprised the first day she had to go to work. She was dressed up in some pretty nice clothes. Some kind of women's business suit with a skirt and heels. But what astounded me was my daycare, or who it was. I was taken to my godmother's. She was running a daycare from her house. I was the second kid dropped off for the day. The first one being my godbrother Peter. After my mother left, it wasn't long before a few more kids were also dropped off. I have to say Aunt May is a saint. I don't think I could handle almost 10 kids ranging from less than a year to 2 or 3 years old. I suppose the babies were easy when they weren't crying, but sometimes one would start and all the rest would follow. Luckily, she only had 4 babies to deal with. The rest of the kids were older. I was probably her favorite because I wouldn't cry. I would make some noise to get her attention, and she would come check on me to see what was wrong. Within the first week, she realized I only made noise if I had an issue. Time passed pretty quickly like this. I would wake up and be fed. My mom would take me to May's, and I would spend my day under her care with the other kids. At some point, my father would come pick me up and take me home. He would then cook dinner for us. I would be in the kitchen with him, normally in my baby basket, as he would sing and cook. My mom would normally get home right after Dad was done cooking, and we would all eat. Turns out my dad was a really good cook. If the praise my mother rained on him every night was anything to go on. I still haven't had the chance to taste his cooking yet. After that, we would spend time together as a family. Sometimes it was listening to music as they talked to each other about their day. That was how I found out my mother was actually a pretty high-end lawyer who specialized in patents and the laws around them, and my father was a car mechanic. There were other things we did like playing baby games, but mostly it was them reading to me. They would take turns reading a book. My mom would normally be the narrator of the story and any female character. while my father would make sound effects and make voices for anything else. It was honestly better than most things you could watch on TV. I have to say, my new family was awesome. My daily routine didn't really change much. I still used my chakra every day with the Yamanaka clan techniques I had. I was almost ready to start putting them into place. But once they were in place, I wouldn't really have a way to use my chakra up every day. So it was better to wait till I could do other things with my chakra till then. I am pretty sure most people who are reincarnated would be rushing to spit fireballs at this point. But honestly, being a baby, you don't have many options to hide what you are doing, and I was enjoying my new life. It was nice to have an actual family for once. The closest I had to a family in my old life was my AI son, and we were only together for a few years. Heck, I never had the chance to meet my daughter. But it sounds like she grew up all right. The first real change in my new life was when I was a little over 6 months old. I started to walk around. To say my parents were overjoyed would be an understatement. They showed me off to Ben and May within 20 minutes of me walking in front of them, and the next day showed me off to Richard and Mary. I had started crawling around for a while before that. I would crawl till I pretty much passed out from it. But with the body I had, it actually helped me to develop faster. Within a month of that, I was able to walk most of the time. I would still crawl a lot because it was honestly pretty fun and seemed to help my arms get stronger. Once I was bigger, I planned to try and climb everything I could. I was already eyeing the bookshelf in the living room. Hopefully it is bolted to the wall. Once I was able to walk around pretty well, I found out something kinda interesting at daycare. The 4 babies there were me, Peter, and 2 girls. Both girls had red hair and semi-green eyes. I assume one is MJ, but the other I am not sure about, and I have never heard May say either of their names. My best guess would be Jean or Angelica, but they should be older, I think. I don't actually know the proper date yet, and I also have no idea how the other guy changed the world. Heck, at this point, she could be Natasha Romanoff for all I know. A mystery to solve later, I guess. Around 9 months is when I finally set up proper Yamanaka clan techniques for my Mindscape's defenses. I didn't add anything to the outside of my city, though. I set it up inside each copy of my home, specifically in my server rooms where my memory banks were. The first part was a special genjutsu the Yamanaka clan had for protecting their own minds from interrogation. I spent months modifying it and making it my own. It would originally trap whoever entered their mind and would let the Yamanaka clan member take over the other person's body. While that could be useful for helping someone escape if they were captured by enemies, I had changed it to something better. It would still trap the other person's mind inside of my mindscape. But instead of my mind taking over someone else's body, it would get a very specific set of orders to carry out. If I was captured, release me. If they were just probing me for info, send me everything about them. Nothing too crazy, but with what I had already, it was just an extra layer of protection. Since it was set up with Chakra, no one in this world should be able to break it like my other defenses. But if they did, well, that's when the next technique comes into play. If someone was powerful enough to break through what I already had set up, I had a nasty surprise waiting for them. If they were somehow able to figure out my programming languages and access all my servers, well, that's when my offensive genjutsu will activate. It only activates when someone other than me accesses the servers I have. The more of them they access, the worse it will be. If they somehow access all of them, well, they pretty much become a vegetable. The genjutsu is part of the info on the servers and will slowly begin to erase the other person's memories. I made it slow and to target older memories first. But the more servers they look through, the faster it becomes and the more aggressive it will be. I am still not 100% if it will work or not, but from all the testing I have done, it should work. At least the countless mind clones I made to test it all had the desired effect on them. It was pretty disturbing to see a clone of myself slowly stop moving and then just fall to the floor, its lifeless eyes staring at nothing as it just breathes. I would then enter the clone's mind to find that nothing was left inside of the mind I had given it. I am actually a little afraid of it happening to someone else, but if they are that powerful to get to that point and ruthless enough to force their way into my mind like that, well, they probably shouldn't be left alive then. After they were all set up and working, I had to find a new way to drain my chakra. I started doing the simplest thing, leaf sticking exercise. But since I was still a baby and wasn't allowed to go outside, it was called the block sticking exercise. I would use the toy blocks I was given and would stick them to my hands. If anyone looked at me, they would see me holding blocks in my hands. But I wouldn't be using my hand at all. It would all be from Chakra sticking the block to my palm. Both my parents and May thought the blocks were my favorite toys, because I would almost never put them down. Not only was I using all my chakra each day, I was also training my control from the practice. Tree climbing wouldn't be too far away if I kept up this pace. It would be more like a baby crawling on the walls and roof of my room. But one day I will run up a tree. Out of the 4 babies in my daycare group, I might have been the first to walk around, but the other 3 weren't that far behind. They could already stand up on their own, but still did more crawling than anything else. The one thing that surprised me was Peter. He was the first to talk. I had already tested it out. I could talk already. I just didn't like the way I sounded at all. My vocal cords were still weak, and honestly I didn't talk much in my old life. I was more than fine not talking most of the time. Old habits and all of that. The next big thing to happen actually came when I was a little over 10 months old. It was something I was expecting to happen, but it was still a surprise. My mother had become pregnant, and my parents were ecstatic to say the least. May, Ben, Richard, and Mary had a party to celebrate the news. Me and Peter were there also, and I was playing with my blocks for the most of it. But since everyone that my parents considered family were here, I figured I would say my first official words. 00005. First words. I was playing with my blocks and watched as Peter crawled over to his parents and said, "Mom, up." Everyone smiled at that as his mom picked him up into her lap to hold him. I figured I might as well do something cute too. So I set down my blocks and walked over to my parents. Everyone looked down at me as I glanced at my mom first before looking at my dad. He was looking down at me, and I put my arms up to him as I slowly started to stutter out, "KW." His face at first went into shock, then joy as he looked down at me and said, "Come on, you can do it, Theo. Say daddy." Daddy. He glanced at my mother, and I could see a smug smile flash on his face as he did that. She didn't respond to him, but instead said to me, "Say mommy, mommy. You can do it, sweetie." I looked over at her for a moment, but then looked back to my father and spoke out again, "Qui." May said, "It doesn't sound like he is trying to say mommy or daddy. He is trying to say something else. Qui something? I wonder what that is." Ben looked over at my parents and asked, "Do you know what he might be trying to say?" My dad shook his head no in reply, but my mom just stared at me silently. I looked at her and smiled a little as I said, "Quick." "Quick? His first word is quick?" Richard asked. Everyone else looked confused at this, but my father's face was turning into a frown. As my mother began to smile, I went in for it again and said, "Quick shoe?" May asked this time, "Quick shoe? What does that even mean?" At this point, my father had a look of horror on his face, and my mother was doing the best impression of the Cheshire Cat I had ever seen. I went in for the kill at this point and said, "Quick shot." My father's face crumpled at this, and my mother, May, and Mary started laughing like crazy. A second later, my father slowly looked at my mother and said in a defeated voice, "This is all your fault." She couldn't reply because she was too busy laughing. Richard and Ben looked a little out of the joke at first, but they caught on and started laughing also. Even Peter started laughing, but I know he had no idea what was going on. I figured I should do my dad a solid since I just threw him under the bus as it were. I looked at him and said, "Daddy." At that point, everyone actually settled their laughter down. The others looked happy. My mom looked a little shocked and my dad was actually smiling now. But that stopped as soon as I said, "Quick shot, Daddy." His face fell again, and everyone started to laugh again. He looked at me as if I had betrayed him. I just smiled back at him and said, "Daddy," as I shook my raised arms at him. He smiled down at me and picked me up. As he did, he looked over at my mother and said smugly, "Well, it looks like he likes me more." She calmed her laughter and replied, "Yup, he just loves his quick shot daddy," before erupting into laughter again. After that, the day mellowed out. My mother and father gave a brief account on how I had heard Quickshot. She would tease him with it a good bit, and they assumed I had picked it up from there. After the party, I was fed and put to bed. I knew I was gonna be left alone because I could hear my parents start up their nightly routine. You would think they might slow down once she was pregnant again, but that just seemed to make it worse. I tried my best to tune it out and began to practice my next technique to learn. I was going to try and climb my cribs bars tonight. It was a lot harder than I thought it would be. Putting a foot on a bar and sticking to it was easy. Trying to pull my whole body weight up at the same time? Not possible at this point. I just didn't have the muscles for it at all. The next step was to try with my knee. It was a little different. But once my right knee was stuck to the bar, I stuck both of my hands to the bars. Once I was secure, I moved my left knee up and was suspended from the bars. It was a weird feeling at first, but after I stuck my other knee to the bar, I tried to move. My first attempt had me fall back into my crib because everything was released at once. I would like to say it only took me a few tries to release only one body part at a time. But that would be a lie. I attempted it for almost an hour before I gave up exhausted. That and my parents were still going at it, and I was tired of listening. You can only tune out so much before it begins to leak through. Over the next month, I spent at least an hour a night trying to climb my crib with mixed results. Mostly because I was just too weak to carry my body weight, and second because my chakra control is terrible. It was a very good way to expand my chakra each night though, so I kept at it. Another thing I did this month was say mommy and a few other words. My mother was very happy at hearing me say it, and she will get a little smile anytime I call her that. I have also started to look at books whenever I can. They are all kid books for now. But I am using it as an excuse to learn to read. My parents already picked up a few ABC books for me, and I have started to ask, "What's that?" to find out stuff. So my vocab has been growing quickly thanks to that. Another thing I learned over this past month is that the two girls in daycare are actually MJ and Jean. I was a little shocked to learn that. I really thought she should be older timeline-wise, because Jean tends to be older than Peter most of the time in the comics, but then again Peter would also be older at this point. I am surprised other people aren't in daycare with us at this point. So far, whatever changes the other person did to the world seemed kinda tame. Something I learned just before my first birthday was where my dad and Ben worked. Or more to say, I visited the business they owned together. My father and mother took me for a walk for the first time, and we actually walked to his shop. They had taken me outside a few times for walks up around our neighborhood, but this time we actually left the neighborhood. We went a few blocks away, about a 20-minute walk, and came upon my dad and Uncle Ben's shop. It was at the edge of a warehouse district from what I could tell. It seemed like a really good spot to run a repair shop, honestly. My dad picked me up out of the stroller and pointed to the building while he said, "Theo, this is Daddy's shop. It might not look like much, but me and your Uncle Ben own this whole building and that fenced-off parking lot over there." He looked down at me and smiled as he said, "One day this will be yours. Hopefully you will be into cars as much as I am." My mother smiled and said, "He can be into cars as much as he likes, but we should push him into a good career field. Maybe something in computers? Programming makes a lot of money. We will see. I would rather see him make less money and be happy in life than doing something he hates," my father said as he placed me back into the stroller, then opened the door for my mother to walk inside. My mother looked thoughtful for a moment before nodding in reply before walking inside the building. The building used to be a decent-sized warehouse as far as I could tell, but they converted it into a garage with 5 car lifts. The garage itself had pretty much every tool you could think of in it. A paint booth, a metalworking and fabrication area. There was also a small office area they had built so they could order parts, talk to customers, or just take a break. The warehouse also had a basement which was almost the same size area as the warehouse itself. They mostly used a small part of it for storage of extra parts or used parts. "So why did you want us to come here, honey?" my mother asked as my father was leading us to the back area of the shop. It looked like it was used for storage. I was curious myself. My dad had been adamant about bringing us to his shop with him today when my mother got home from work, but he didn't say why. Now we were here, and he was walking into one area of the shop, the area where he had a few cars parked. But behind those cars were 2 items covered with tarps. As we got closer, my mother said, "You can't be serious." My father just smiled and pulled the tarp off of one of the items. It was a car almost completely stripped. The few parts on it were worn out and rusted. He proudly turned to my mother and me and said, "This is a 1970 Dodge Challenger T/A, and this will be Theo's when he turns 16. I thought you were joking. A 16-year-old shouldn't have a car like this," my mother said, clearly upset about what my father wanted to do. "It will be fine, honey. I have a plan. Look at it." He pointed at the car and said, "The car needs a lot of work and a lot of parts. My plan is to restore it with Theo helping me the whole way. It will help him build appreciation for the car and responsibility at the same time." I also plan to pay him for his time. So when he is 16, he can pay us for his car insurance and gas for the vehicle. He will also have to work a set amount of hours here each week and keep passing grades if he wants to keep using the car. Not including that he will also have to help around the house. My mom is quiet for a few minutes. Afterwards, she lets out a sigh. It looks like you actually did plan this out. I still don't like the thought of little Theo having a muscle car when he is 16. My father laughed as he walked up to my mother and embraced her in a hug. After he released her, he reached into my stroller and picked me up. Walking closer to the car, he pointed at it and said, "You might not understand right now, but one day this will be yours, and you will be the envy of all the boys in your high school." My mother asked, "What's under the other tarp?" My father turned around with an even bigger grin on his face and said, "The car that Ben picked out for Peter. He will be under the same restrictions that Theo has to use it." Well, it looks like me and Peter are going to be pretty popular in high school if we both have cars. Ben is doing the same thing for Peter? Did he ask Richard about it? Yeah, we all talked about it. Richard loved the idea. He was also happy it would give Peter a reason to spend time with his uncle. Ben and I also planned to work on the cars at the same time. That way Peter and Theo can hang out together as well. What car did Ben pick out for Peter? A 1970 Ford Boss 302 Mustang. You and Ben, I understand. You are both stupid gearheads. But Richard also? The whole lot of you are idiots. You plan to give two 16-year-old boys muscle cars? My mother's hands go up in the air as she talks. You realize they will probably race each other in those things. The smile on my father's face is all she needs to know. She shakes her head in frustration before asking, "Why did I marry an idiot?" My father laughs and says, "Because you love my cooking and charming personality." My mother stares at my father for a few moments before she says, "You are still an idiot, a lovable idiot. Kinda like a puppy." Laughing again, my father pulls my mother into a hug while still holding me, and I hear her ask, "Has anyone even talked to Mary or May about this?" My father pulled back and looked slightly guilty as he said, "We were all kinda hoping you would talk to them for us." 00006. First birthday. It had been almost a year since the future had become cloudy and uncertain for the current Sorcerer Supreme. All of the current masters of the mystic arts have been searching for any hint of what could have caused the issue, but so far they have found nothing at all. It has become a pressing concern for all of them, the longer it's gone on. Currently seated in her room was the Sorcerer Supreme, holding the Eye of Agamotto. A green glow was radiating around her as she looked through possible futures. Although most of it was clouded up and hard to see, she could still see glimpses of what might happen. So she would persist and spend a few hours a day looking for any clue she could get. All around her were quick flashes of what might happen, obscured mostly by thick clouds of dark fog. As she looked from one image to the next, she kept looking for anything that she hadn't seen before her visions of the future were clouded over. It was a long and tiring task, and so far she had found nothing again today and was getting close to giving up when she found something new. A man with his back to her was holding up someone by the throat with one hand. There were other people on the ground surrounding the man. The thing that made the Sorcerer Supreme pause was something seemed off about the image she found. The longer she was looking at it, the more wrong it felt. As she tried to memorize every detail she could about the image, the man turned around to look at her. His eyes were red with 3 black tomos around it. When the man looked at the Sorcerer Supreme, she flinched back in shock, and the man smirked before the image disappeared. Canceling her spell, she sat there for a few minutes, trying to compose herself. Despite the impossibility, she was positive that the man with those red and black eyes had seen her as she had been observing him. Unsure if it was a good thing she had found a clue, or bad that someone had the power to see her as she browsed possible futures was up in the air. But now that she had a clue, she had work that needed to be done. Getting up and walking to her door, she opened it and looked to the left at the man sitting there reading a tome. "Mr. Pangborn, I need you to go to each of the Sanctum Masters, Wong, Kaiselius, Mordo, and Hammer. Please ask them to join me tonight around 7 for a meeting. I would also ask that you join us." The man stood up slowly with the help of the wall and set his tome down on the chair he was using. After grabbing a set of crutches he had to the side, he said, "It will be done soon, Master." "Thank you very much." She stepped back into her room, and the man started to walk down the hallway. Letting out a sigh, she walked to her desk and pulled out some writing supplies and started to write down everything she could remember about what she had seen. Once finished with that, she took out some art supplies and made a perfect copy of the man's eyes. When finished, she put everything extra away and began to set up a meeting table with cushions and cups placed for all the people she expected to come. Afterwards, she sat down, beginning to go over everything she had found and trying to figure out how to compose what she wanted to tell everyone. To say my first birthday was memorable would be an understatement. It was a few days after my mother had a talk with Mary and May. The conversation didn't go over that well, at least from the defiant look the three men at my party were wearing. My mother and her friends, on the other hand, looked to be downright hostile. This little family birthday party for me had just started and no one was talking, just staring at each other. Only me and Peter were the only ones enjoying ourselves as far as I could tell. Peter was sitting next to me looking at a picture book with me. I would say the name of whatever was on the page, and he would copy me. Once he said it correctly, I would point to each letter and say them. He would copy me afterwards. Once finished, we would go to the next page and start over again. It might be simple stuff like apple, bee, and cat. It might also sound boring to someone else, but seeing how quickly he picks up on things is just amazing. I was also using this as a way to distract him from all of our parents acting like brooding teenagers. It took a while, but once we finished the book, I looked up and noticed that everyone had somehow stopped brooding and were looking at me and Peter while smiling. May was the first to speak as she said, "You know what? I think everything will be all right." She looked at the two women next to her, and they both nodded back in agreement. Afterwards, she looked over at her husband and the other two men and said, "I still think it's a stupid idea, but I think it might work out fine with these two." My mother and Mary both shook their heads in agreement, but most of the tension in the room had already faded. Me and Peter were looking at the adults in the room when my father said, "This is supposed to be a party. Let's put some music on and enjoy ourselves." Reaching over, my father turned on the radio and the last song just finished. The announcer comes on and says, "Still not sure why that is the current #1 song, but the next song is a favorite that everyone is gonna love. This came out as a single about 2 months ago and will be featured on his debut album coming out in the next week. You should know this as soon as you hear it, so I won't introduce it." The radio cuts out for a second like it was being tuned to a new station, then a beat kicks on. "Hello? I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her." As the music began to play, my father reached down and picked me up. Peter was picked up by his father, and they took us into the kitchen to check out the birthday cake my father had made. Setting us both down in some high chairs, my father pulled out a decent-sized cake from the oven. It was already decked out with a chocolate frosting and a big #1 candle on it. Setting it on the table, he looked over at me and said, "Theo, this is your first birthday, and we have a tradition. We will sing you happy birthday, and once we are done, you need to blow out this candle that I will light. But make sure you make a wish and don't tell anyone what it is, okay?" I shake my head yes in reply, and he lights the candle and everyone but Peter begins to sing, "Happy Birthday." As they get closer to the end of the song, I make a silent wish in my heart. I wish that my son and daughter have a good life. After the song finished, I blew out the candle, and my father began to slice the cake into pieces for everyone. Me and Peter were given the cake with nothing to eat it with, while Peter tried to pretty much ham-fist the whole thing into his mouth in one shot. I took my time and pulled pieces off one at a time until I was done. Peter looked like he had shoved his face and hands into the cake when he was done, and I only had a couple of fingers dirty. My father and mother looked a little depressed that I didn't look like Peter when I was done, but they were happy to get a picture of me and Peter together. From the picture, you would never guess I was the birthday boy. The current Sorcerer Supreme looked at the people she had gathered together. It was some of the most powerful sorcerers currently alive, and a few people who she would need to deal with now that the future was so uncertain. Looking at her first issue, she addressed everyone at the table and said, "I would like to thank you all for coming to this meeting. I know you have questions, but I need to take care of a few things first. Mr. Pangborn, how are your studies coming along? How much longer do you think before you can walk or run unassisted?" The man looked a little shocked at being addressed so suddenly but replied, "I think I will have it mastered in about a year or so." "Good. Once you have it completely mastered, you can go back to your old life. That is what you plan to do, correct?" Before Pangborn could speak, Mordo started to stand up and speak up when the Ancient One raised a hand and said, "I will answer all of your questions later. Mr. Pangborn, if you would." "You are correct. Once I can walk properly again, I was going to leave the order." He bows his head slightly in shame. "Head up, Mr. Pangborn. I already knew you would and I never planned to stop you. I do have a task for you after you leave. It is a simple task that should take time, but it won't interfere with your normal life, and you can refuse to accept it if you like." Without taking any time to think, Pangborn replied, "I would gladly complete the task for you, if it's something I can do while I live my normal life." The Ancient One smiled and then said, "I thought as much. Here I wish for you to let me know if you ever hear about a man with these eyes." She raises up the picture she drew of the red eyes with the 3 black tomes and shows it to everyone before sending it to Pangborn. Once he had it in his hands, she said, "This is not something you need to go out of your way to look for, just while you are out in the world doing your daily life. That will be all for tonight, and I thank you for your time, Mr. Pangborn." Pangborn bowed slightly and then said, "Thank you for your time, Master." He looked at everyone else and performed another slight bow and said, "Have a good night, everyone." It took a minute for him to get up and leave the room, but after he had left, Mordo was the first to speak and said, "We just let him leave the order with what he knows, Master?" "Yes, we do. I already saw what he was going to do long before he was even born. While I know how you feel about natural balance and what I have taught you about it, I plan to change some things with how the natural order was planned. This is one of them." Mordo has a look of shock on his face, along with pretty much everyone else in the room. The Ancient One raised her hands before anyone could speak and said, "This will be a long conversation, and once I am done I will gladly answer any and all questions. But I need everyone to listen first, and hopefully when I am finished you will all understand my decisions that I am going to take moving forward." Everyone settled down a little and decided to listen to what their teacher had to say. It was a very long night that didn't end till well into the next day. 00007. Pancakes? Pancakes. Time seems to fly when you are a kid, but you have the mind of an adult. I remember when I was a kid in my previous life, that time seemed to take forever. I know it's because my perception of it changed as I got older, but being a 1-year-old and having the mind of someone past 50 is weird. My life is so structured that this first year of my new life just flew by before I realized it. Wake up, train my chakra control, parents get me an eye poop, get fed breakfast, then I go over to Maze for the day. At Maze, I do more chakra control with my blocks, look at books, and help Peter learn how to read some more. MJ and Jean seem to hang around us most days, so I've been trying to teach them words also with mixed results. They don't seem to focus as much as Peter does. Around noon is lunchtime, and May normally makes something pretty healthy for all of the kids. For the younger kids like me, it's a mix of baby food and something else she will make. Mostly it's baby food though. After that she will get everyone settled down and do story time, or for the younger kids more of a nap time. I don't fall asleep myself. I just make it look like I am sleeping and go into my mindscape and work on making my defenses better and more sturdy. After that is just more free time that I use to climb stuff. The chairs, couches, bookshelf, coffee table, entertainment center. Sometimes I switch it up and try it in the morning. I normally have to wait for May to turn her back or be dealing with another kid to do it. Unfortunately, Peter likes to follow my lead, so sometimes he will get us caught pretty fast if he falls. Around 5 p.m. is when my dad comes back from the shop and picks me up. When we get home, he brings me into the kitchen and starts to make dinner while he will sing and talk with me. Now that I am speaking, he tries to hold at least one conversation with me a day, mostly just asking about my day and if I learned anything new during the day. I normally tell him 1 or 2 new words I learned or about something I figured out that day. A little while later is dinner when my mom gets home. After that I have some free time to play with my blocks, normally while I read books. That is when my parents will spend some time together and talk about their days with each other. Then comes the best part of the day, story time with my parents. While it might seem weird, me with my old memories and stuff, but I honestly enjoy this a lot. It's my first real-time experiencing what a family is like. In my last life, I grew up in an orphanage, and because of health issues, no one wanted to adopt me. I was somewhat lucky since I had access to computers at an early age, and with my condition, it pushed me to become a programmer. But I am getting sidetracked. I was talking about my current life and story time with my family. After story time, it is bath time and then bedtime. They tend to stay up and do other things, and I spend some time doing chakra control and trying to climb my crib bars with chakra before going into my mindscape. I will spend a few hours there either improving my mental defenses or studying the knowledge I have gained from the world of Naruto. That was my routine until my mother started staying home from work as she got closer to having my new sibling. For the past little while, I have spent my days pretty much the same as before, except that my mother will join me at Aunt May's house for the day. She mostly hangs out in the living room and helps watch me and the other children as she chats with May. Then we will head home when my father comes home from work, except this time he is dirty from work and will take a shower while me and Mom hang out in the kitchen and she starts to get dinner ready. Dad will of course take over once he is out of the shower, and then the rest of the night is the same as before. That went on for about 2 months before I was woken up early in the morning by my father. He looked slightly panicked, but he still had his signature smirk on his face as he said, "Hey kiddo, I didn't mean to wake you up, but me and your mom have to go to the hospital, and you are going to your aunt and uncle's house for a few days." He picked me up and asked, "Can you be a good boy for me while me and your mother are gone, and we will bring you home a surprise?" "Yes, Dad, I will be good. I knew I could count on you." He carried me out of the room and downstairs where I could see May sitting next to my mother. My mother was sweating heavily and looked to be in a bit of pain. As my father handed me to May, Ben came in the front door and said, "I have the car ready to go." My father went over and helped my mother up as he said, "All right, let's get going then, May." "Ben, thanks for watching Theo for us. We both appreciate it a lot." May looked down at me and said, "It's no trouble at all. It's what family does. Plus Theo will be a good boy while he stays with us, won't you?" "Yes, Aunt May. See, nothing to worry about. Now get going, and Ben, you better not be speeding." Ben chuckled and said, "It didn't even cross my mind, dear. I will see you when I get home, honey." May got up from her seat holding me and walked out the door, watching them load into the car and take off. The sun was just starting to rise in the pre-dawn light. She looked down at me and said, "Well, it's just me and you for a while. How about we start making breakfast? Would you like to try some pancakes, Theo?" "Pancakes? Are they good?" "I hope they are amazing. I never had the chance to eat them and many other things in my past life because of my health issues." She smiled down at me for a second. "Just wait. You are gonna love them." She turned around and locked up the house. Then she started walking to her house with me in her arms. Once we got there, she set me in a high chair in the kitchen and started to pull stuff out of the cabinets. She looked over to Theo and said, "Do you want to know the secret to great pancakes, Theo?" Nodding my head, I said, "Yes, because you said I am gonna love them." She laughed a little bit and smiled as she said, "Well, the secret to making good pancakes is to make your mix from scratch." "Do you know what that means?" Dad said that means you make everything yourself. That is correct. Whenever you make something from scratch, you always make everything yourself from the base ingredients. Your dad is a very good cook. You can learn a lot from him when you are older. Dad likes to say, being a good cook can make anyone your friend. I am not completely sure about that, but being a good cook does help with making friends. As she talked, I watched as she was adding different things to a mixing bowl: flour, baking soda, salt, sugar. After that was mixed well, she added 1 egg, some melted butter, milk, some vanilla extract, and mixed it all together. It took a little while, but she finished mixing it all together, and what was left was a slightly lumpy mix of batter. She lifted her mixer, and the batter slowly slid off of it. This is how you can tell that the batter is perfect: a little lumpy, and it will hold together decently but still spread out. She turned around and started preparing her skillet, heating it up, and then coated it with a layer of butter. Then she poured in some batter. I watched her work for a while in silence, and by the time she finished pouring in the last of the batter, Uncle Ben could be heard from the front door as he said, "Smells like someone is making my favorite breakfast food. You better hurry up. Aunt May and I are almost done eating them all." We heard the front door slam shut and someone running through the living room. When Uncle Ben came to a stop in the kitchen, I started laughing like crazy, and May started to chuckle. Uncle Ben looked at the stacks of pancakes and me laughing in my high chair and said, "You are getting more like your father. I liked it better when you didn't talk." Me and May both laughed at that as he let out a sigh and sat down in a chair next to me and said, "May, are you going to give Theo pancakes?" "Yes, I am. I figured he should be fine eating some of them. Just not too much syrup. I don't want him climbing up the walls more than he normally does." "I don't climb up the walls, only the bookshelf, couches, and a few other things." And why do you do that? Uncle Ben asked. Because it's fun. Why else would you do something? May frowned a little bit and said, what happens when you climb up something and then fall off and get hurt? I don't fall in the first place. You might not have fallen yet, but Peter has a few times. You are setting a bad example for him, May said, as she finished the last pancake and began to prepare some for me, with a little bit of butter and syrup. I told him not to try it, but he said if I can do it, so can he. Uncle Ben laughed at that as he made himself a plate of pancakes and said, you are pretty much like a brother to him. Of course he is going to try and follow your lead. So what do you think you should do, since you know he is just going to copy you? Ben smirked at May after he finished and began to eat his plate of pancakes. She smiled back at him as I stayed quiet for a minute and waited till he was drinking some milk and said, then I will just have to teach him how to climb from now on, so he doesn't fall. He choked slightly on his milk and May laughed at his expense before giving me a glare and said, don't you think the proper thing to do is just not climb anything anymore? Then you and Peter won't get hurt and worry all of us. You can't keep us safe forever. Might as well get used to us getting hurt now. May had just set a plate of cut-up pancakes down in front of me as I finished talking. Both of them gave me a weird look as Ben said, sometimes you don't talk like a kid at all. You know that, Theo? I agree with that. He reminds me of an adult sometimes. I picked up my plastic spork and scooped up my first piece of pancake with it as I laughed and said, you know, my mom says the same thing. Dad says I am too smart for my age. I agree with both of them. Uncle Ben shook his head and chuckled as he said, does he always talk like this, honey? Pretty much, even with the other kids. But sometimes he says stuff that only a kid would say and catches you off guard. As they talked, I put the first piece of pancake in my mouth and my eyes went wide at the flavor of it mixed with the butter and syrup. It was the richest, most sugary thing I had ever eaten in both lives, and it was amazing. Not even my birthday cake could compare. It was sugary, nutty with a hint of something else. I finished my first bite and looked at May as I excitedly said, this is amazing. Can I have more? Ben laughed as May looked at my still full plate and said, finish your first plate and I might give you one more. I scooped up another one as I said, you don't have to worry about me, Aunt May. These are the best things I have ever had. I could eat them till I burst. Well, I will agree with you there, Theo. May's pancakes are the best. May chuckled and said, both of you flatterers just finish your food, and you might get more. Both Uncle Ben and I said, yes, ma'am. We looked at each other and then laughed, before starting to eat our fill of pancakes. Aunt May smiled at both of us and then started to eat her own plate of pancakes. 00008. New family member. The next few days passed pretty quickly while I stayed with my godparents. My father came home and visited a few times, mostly to shower, change clothes, and check up on me. After 3 days, both my parents came home with a baby carrier. Both my mother and father were extremely happy when they picked me up and took me home. The first thing my mother did was give me a long hug and kiss on the cheek. When I was released from the hug, my father picked me up and sat me down next to him on the couch. My mom picked up a baby out of the carrier, and after she settled the baby in her arms, she looked at me and said, Theo, sweetie, I would like you to meet your new little sister. Her name is Emily Mercer. I looked down at the baby my mother held, and I couldn't help but smile. She was currently sleeping peacefully in my mother's arms. As I looked at her, I noticed she looked a little different than me. The little bit of hair she had was the same reddish-brown hair that my mother had, while I had dark black hair, kinda like my father. She also looked slightly like a mix of my parents, at least it seemed like it. She mostly looked like a baby. I looked at both my parents as they smiled at me and I said, you realize that she will probably be a lot more work to take care of than I was. My father laughed a little at that and looked at my mother and said, I win. My mother just let out a sigh as she gently rocked back and forth with my sister in her arms. She looked at me, then my father, and said, you know, if she is a handful, you are the one who will have to take care of it most of the time, especially if it's in the middle of the night. My father just smiled at that, and then my mother looked back at me and said, normally I wouldn't expect a child your age to help out, but you don't really act like a child. So you are going to be helping us to watch over your little sister. Can you do that for us, Theo? Yes, mother. I will do my best as an older brother. I knew I could count on you. My father patted my head and said, if you just treat her like you do Peter, I am sure you will be great. The rest of the day passed quickly with us hanging out as a family together with our newest family member. I was right. She seemed to be really fussy and was going to be a handful for my parents. But that's fine. Both my parents are delighted anytime they interact with her, and I admit, I am also. She might be fussy, but she is also my little sister. Life turned into a new routine for our family after a small party with my godparents and Peter's parents. The new routine was me and Emily in my room after my mother finished her maternity leave. She ended up being a big handful and likes to wake up in the middle of the night at least once. Most times it's closer to 2 or 3 times a night. She has a crazy set of lungs too. I have never heard a baby that was so loud when they cry. It's been over 2 months since she came home, and my dad has been getting run ragged. He gets maybe 3 to 5 hours of sleep a night, since he has to take care of my sister once she wakes up. My mother helps out on the weekends, but during the week it is my father who takes care of Emily at night. I have tried to help out a few times before she starts crying, but nothing I do seems to help. She likes to wake up and then instantly start to cry, so most of the time I don't even have a chance to act. I think most of the time it's because she needs a change, but sometimes she just wakes up and starts crying. The only thing my father can do is make her some warm milk and rock her back to sleep. Those times she normally doesn't wake back up because she and my father fall asleep together in the rocking chair. My mom always comes into the room and has the biggest smile on her face when she sees Emily and my father like that. I have to admit it's a very cute sight. Emily is resting in his arms. His head is tilted to the side on his shoulder, and he has a bit of drool coming out of his mouth. Mom has taken a few pictures of it, and one of them is now sitting in a frame downstairs. Anyways, our new family routine is after we wake up. Mom goes to work early. Dad finishes getting us ready. Mostly it is my sister. I get myself ready. Then we walk over to Aunt May's and get dropped off. My father leaves for work with Ben, and we start our day at May's. Normally Peter, MJ, and Jean get there not long after me, and we hang out. I use that very loosely. It's more that we are sitting close together and might do stuff together. Mostly I try to teach them to read. Peter is the only one who likes to try and learn. MJ and Jean are now talking, but they are a little slower with learning than Peter and I. It's mostly because they don't like to focus like me and Peter do. Spending the day goes pretty much the same as before, reading and learning with Peter as I practice with my blocks. Then lunch, story/nap time. Then I try to climb stuff with Peter. MJ and Jean don't follow us most of the time, and even when they do, they don't normally climb things with us. Not long after that, my father comes home with Ben. My father will come home and clean up. Once he is done, he will come pick up Emily and me. Then it's us in the kitchen with him as he cooks dinner. My father and I chat some while he cooks, while I also try to play with Emily. My mother gets home around the time when dinner is done. We eat together, then my mother spends time with me and Emily while father washes the dishes. After that it's family time for a while, then we do story time. They have been reading books they already read to me, so I can help read them also. We all take turns reading from the book to Emily. I think she enjoys it. At least it seems like it when she giggles/burbles at my father making all his weird noises. After story time, we are normally put to bed and my parents stay up for a while and spend time together. I normally take this time to train myself more, mostly doing tree climbing on my crib bars. I can now crawl/climb with my arms and legs. If someone came into our room at night, they might think they are in a horror movie with me climbing on the walls and roof. It's actually kind of funny when I do it. Another thing I have learned from this is to use my chakra to sense things around me. It is a very short distance for now, only a few inches from my body. But with practice and more chakra, I am pretty sure I could sense anything around me from a very big distance. I actually stumbled upon it by accident. Normally people who are sensors sense chakra from other people. But since I am the only one who has chakra, I thought it would be useless. But it looks like it works with the way I will use Sage mode. Since I will use universal energy for my Sage mode, I can use my chakra to sense universal energy, and since it is all around me, I can sense things around me. It's a little weird, but what happened is I was trying to crawl/climb on the wall with my chakra. I didn't want to break the drywall, so I was trying to stick to the drywall and wall stud behind it. The issue is I had no idea where the wall stud would be. It took a while, but by using my chakra and some different sensor skills, I figured out a way to sense things from my chakra. It's still in the early stages and only works if I put a lot of concentration into it. But with practice and refinement, I should be able to use this to help me out a lot in the future. I think once I figure out Sage Mode, it will be even better. But that is for the future. Right now it is horror movie baby time. I mean practicing chakra control while I climb on the roof. Speaking of chakra, I have a lot of it now. I admit I am not using anything that is too heavy chakra-wise. But it takes me using it with my different practices all day and at night to finally deplete it. I have been looking for different ways to deplete it easier. So far, water-type jutsu seems to be the safest thing I can use. The only issue is I would be making a mess with the water I create or control. I have thought about wind a few times, but the issue with that is most of the wind techniques are worse than the water ones. I do have an idea. Use the shadow clone jutsu. My issue is that it splits your chakra between yourself and the clone and also takes a good bit of chakra to use. I have no idea if I even have enough to properly make one right now. I know what you were thinking. Why not the normal clone or hinge jutsu? Or even the substitution jutsu? Well, I have tried. They don't use enough chakra. The chakra amount is so small, it wouldn't be worth it with the time I have to train alone. Also, I don't want to wake up my little sister, so things that are quiet are the best option. It's fine for now. The wall climbing helps to wear my body out from all the exercise it gets. That is how my daily routine is for now. I can't wait till I am older, then I can go play out in the backyard at Aunt May's and practice earth jutsu. I already have a few in mind that will work great, and no one should be able to notice I am doing them. 00009. We have a what? The next 9 months flew by in a flash, with the only thing of note happening being Peter's first birthday. Emily has also started to be less fussy than before and can almost sleep the whole night without waking up. Another positive thing is I have been allowed to go into Aunt May's backyard, but only if her or Uncle Ben are there to watch me. The same goes for at home. It has helped me out a lot with chakra control. When I first started going outside, I would mostly just walk around and explore the area. You can explore them when you consider how big they are to someone like me. Peter and the other kids would join me, of course. Most of them would play with the jungle gym equipment or the outside toys May had back there. After a week, I started to look around the area for small, smooth pebbles. Once I had 2, I started practicing my chakra control. Once I could do 2, I went to 3, then I would add a 4th. Then a 5th and a 6th. I did this till I had over 30 of them. I wanted to keep them with me all the time, but I had no idea where I would hide them. Currently, I stick them under my shirt while I do other stuff in the backyard. I remove them and set them off to the side when we have to go back inside. I also get to practice some earth jutsus when I am in my parents' backyard. It's pretty hard to do, since it's normally me and my parents with Emily. I have to wait till they are paying attention to her, and I am next to the only tree in the yard. I normally sit next to it with a book and pretend to read while I concentrate on my chakra sense and do mini earth movement jutsus behind me and the tree. It's mostly making small holes and filling them back up. Even though they are small holes, it's great for chakra control and using up my chakra. Since I am using my chakra sense the whole time, and the holes are about 2 feet away, it uses my chakra fast. The control comes from using that while making small holes without making a sound. It takes time, but I can do it 4 times before I am almost out of chakra. The other day, I finally made a shadow clone. I didn't use any of my chakra for a full day, and in the middle of the night, I made a single clone. It took a good bit of my chakra and then split the rest. I now know for certain that Naruto was ridiculous. The amount of chakra it would take to do his multi-clone jutsu in the first episode is just stupid. I am sure if I continue to practice and increase my chakra every day, I just might have the same amount of chakra as Naruto at that age. That is also me practicing every day since I was born in Naruto, kind of being a slacker when he was a young kid. Being a main character sure is broken. Oh. Another thing that has happened is I now have some art supplies. I can only use them at home and while in the presence of one of my parents. But I have started to mess around with Fuinjutsu, and I use that term very loosely. I am mostly practicing my writing and drawing. The main thing I do is write letters of the alphabet. My parents are ecstatic about it and have even been bragging to everyone that I am already writing. Some interesting information I found out about Fuinjutsu is that the symbols don't have to be the same as they used in the manga/anime. I can use anything I want as long as I can understand it and imbue my chakra into the ink as I write it. Of course, I have not tried to do this yet. The main reason I figured this out is because I have all the Fuinjutsu knowledge of the Uzumakis. Going through and comparing different people's experiences with Fuinjutsu, I realized it works the same for all of them, even if they use different words or spelling or even a different language. The main thing is that the Fuinjutsu maker understands the words slash and tint and how they interact with each other to make the finished product. One person could make an explosive tag with the words gather, chakra, compress, time, excite, while someone else would use the words converge, fire, compact, delay, discharge. It might seem weird, but they would both cause the same explosion when they go off. There would be slight differences between the tags themselves, like the first one would gather and compress the chakra better, but the second one would have a more stable delay before it went off. The first one would be off by a second or so. Now again, I haven't been able to test any of this yet. This is just going off of the knowledge I have. But it should be pretty concrete, and I should have no issue when I finally start to make stuff. I have also decided to use one of my programming languages for it, mostly so anyone who looks at it too closely will have no idea what it means. I think at some point when I am older I will make storage tattoos. I was thinking about making rings or bracelets, but you could lose those. Someone would have to cut off my arm to make me lose the tattoos. Besides, I am pretty sure I could use an invisible ink to make them, so no one would ever know they are there. I was in the kitchen. My father was singing as he cooked dinner, and Emily was sitting next to me watching as I drew. She had the habit of watching me and what I was doing whenever we were next to each other. As my father was finishing up dinner, the front door opened and my mother said, "Jacob, honey, I have some stuff in the car I need help to bring in." My father removed the skillet he was using from the stove and said, "Just a moment, Danny. Almost finished with dinner. How about we eat and then unload the car?" We could hear the front door close, and my mother walked into the kitchen a moment later as she said, "That's fine. I still have no idea where we are going to put it." I stopped drawing and looked at my mother as I said, "Hi, Mom. How was your day?" She smiled as she came close to me and Emily. After she placed one of her hands on each of our cheeks, she said, "It was good, but it's even better now that I can see both of you again. What about your lovely husband who cooks you dinner every night? You are all right, as long as you keep cooking for me." My father gave out a sigh as he finished plating dinner and said, "I feel so used." "Never get married, Theo?" "Yes, father." As he was placing everything on the table, my mother walked up to him and gave him a hug and a kiss as she said, "Don't give Theo any bad ideas. You know you love being married. Plus, I want grandkids one day." "I want grandkids also." My mother and father sat down at the table, and as my father was feeding Emily, he asked, "So what's in the car that you need help bringing in?" All of the partners at the firm were given brand new computers today from Stark Industries, as a thank you for our help over the years. I am not sure where to put it, or even if I will really use it. I use the one at work enough. I don't really need one at home. A computer? We will have a computer in the house? I will finally get to check out a computer in the Marvel universe. I wonder what OS it is running and how it compares to what I made. I wonder how powerful it is. I know Stark made a lot of stuff that was more advanced than what we should have had at the same time. I looked at my mom and tried to keep myself from giving anything away as I said, "What is a computer?" Before she could say anything, my father spoke up and said, "A computer is this box-shaped thing that lets you do stuff like writing. You can also play games on it." My mother scoffed at that and said, "It is a lot more than just a box that you can write with and play games on. I use one at work every day to make drafts to contracts, email coworkers to talk about ongoing projects, email clients so they can double-check documents without having to come into the office. That is just a small amount of things they can do, Theo." "Email? What is that?" "Email is like a letter you send to someone else with a computer." I looked over at my dad and asked, "What kind of games can you play with a computer? Are they like the games I play at Aunt May's house?" My mother shot my father a look as he smiled at me and said, "Computer games are played on a computer first of all. Computer games are normally played by yourself. They are also a lot different than what you and Peter normally play at May's house." My father winced a little at the end. I think my mother kicked him under the table. My mother looked at me and said, "What your father said is true, but you won't be playing any computer games on this computer. It's mine and I might need to use it for work sometimes, so I don't want to add a bunch of things to it." I gave my best puppy dog eyes I could and said, "Not even one game? You always say to share my things with Peter. Can't you share with Emily, Dad, and me?" My mother looked at me a little shocked as she didn't expect my attack. My father, on the other hand, had the biggest grin on his face. But he didn't say anything. My mom took a moment but then said, "You are right, Theo. I should share with you and Emily. But your father is only allowed to use the computer with you or Emily." My father frowned a little bit, but said nothing as my mother shot him a smug look. The conversation continued for a while longer as we finished dinner. After dinner, my mother went to change as my father cleaned up and washed the dishes. When my father was finished, he and my mother brought in some boxes from her car. The boxes all had a Stark logo on it with some artwork of the computer on it. I didn't help them set it up, I just watched and played with Emily. It took a little bit, but my mom finally settled on putting the computer on the desk she used sometimes to go over paperwork. It took up more than half of the desk, but she still had room to do paperwork if she moved the keyboard and mouse. Once the hardware was set up, she went through the setup process and made her user account. I didn't pay too much attention to it, but I did notice when I heard something I never thought I would hear in person. The dial-out tone for connecting to the internet through a phone line. I looked over at my parents and said, "What is that weird sound? Are you playing a game?" My father looked back at me and said, "No, your mother wanted to check her work email, so we had to connect the computer online to do it. This sound is the computer connecting." "Oh, okay. Let me know when you play a game. I want to see it." My mother looked over and said, "We would have to buy a game first. Give me and your father some time, and we will find a game you and him can play together." "Okay, I can wait." 00010. A day in the life. Knowing that you are a copy of someone else, and you only have a limited lifespan is a little jarring at first. But knowing that whatever you experience will be transferred back to your original self makes it easier. It's not like I would exist without my original self anyways. I normally wouldn't be wasting my time thinking about this kind of stuff, but I am currently waiting for Emily, my parents, and my original self to leave the house. I am currently hiding in the spare bedroom, under the guest bed. It's not very creative, but I can't waste any chakra, so anywhere else is not possible. It's a good thing I was made not long ago. I think I would have gotten bored if I had to waste hours hiding here. My original decided to make me as his parents were getting ready for work. So I only needed to wait about 50 minutes, 20 minutes for them to leave the house and another 30 to make sure they didn't come back. I can hear the front door close and the deadbolt lock latch as they leave the house. I crawled out from under the bed and quickly climbed up the dresser next to the window. Carefully peeking out the window, it was just in time to watch my mother as she started to pull out of the driveway. My father was almost at Aunt May's house with my original self and Emily. I watched them get dropped off and then watched as Ben and my father walked to work. I waited till they were out of sight and then made my way downstairs. Even if someone comes back home, the computer is out of sight of the front door. I should have more than enough time to shut it off. Going to the desk, I pull out the chair a little and climb up onto the desk. Once I am on the desk, I take a closer look at the computer. The first surprise is the computer monitor. It is using some type of stark LCD screen. For the time period, I was expecting a CRT, but then again, this is the Marvel universe and tech should be more advanced here. But considering I have yet to see a TV, my parents and godparents don't own one themselves, I am still a bit surprised. After looking over the monitor and computer for a few minutes, I power on the computer and start spamming escape, F2, F12, and the delete key. It's a pain to do with my current hands, but I managed to make it boot to the BIOS screen. The next surprise I find are the specifications of the hardware. The computer is running a processor at 4.3 GHz, 16 GB of RAM that is clocked at 3600 MHz, and seems to have a solid-state main drive that is 1 TB in size. Now, I might have been a programmer in my last life, but I was also a hardware enthusiast and had a decent collection of older retro tech. Heck, I had some of it because I wanted to check out and play the older games, and you had to have the older computers and consoles to play some of that stuff. The BIOS says that the year is 1996. I know for a fact that in 1996, in my past life, one of the best computers you could have would be running a processor at 166 MHz with 64 MB of RAM. That doesn't even include the 1.6 GB EIDE hard drive it would be using as its main drive. This computer is over 20 years ahead of its time than it would be in my old world. This makes no real sense. I know I am in another universe, but to be so advanced, and this isn't even cutting-edge hardware. This is just a common computer you can buy in the store. How advanced is cutting-edge tech? I shake my head and power cycle the computer. I watch it go through its startup process and load into Windows. Another surprise is that the computer looks to be running something similar to Windows 10, and my mother never set a password for the computer. I am a little disappointed I won't have the chance to bypass it, but it makes my job easier. I will have to teach her to be better with keeping her computer more secure in the future, though. Shit. Why the hell did they connect to the internet with dial-up internet last night? Moving over the desk and looking at the back of the computer, I noticed two things right away. The first being the computer has some kind of GPU, and the next was that we were connected with a standard phone cable. But there is also an Ethernet port on the computer. Maybe Ethernet isn't in most homes currently, and that is why we are using dial-up? Whatever, that is a problem for my original self to figure out. Right now I have a job to do. First, let's see how close this is to Windows 10 and see the specs on this GPU. Opening up the Task Manager, I clicked More Details and then opened the Performance tab. The CPU is actually made by Stark and has 8 cores with 16 threads, a base clock speed of 4.3 GHz, an L1 cache of 1 MB, L2 cache of 8 MB, and an L3 cache of 64 MB. This thing is crazy compared to what I expected it to be. It even has a GPU with 12 GB of VRAM. After a few more minutes of looking over the computer hardware, I began to go through the computer and look at what software was installed on it. Mostly normal Windows software, a few simple games, and some bloatware. I also found a program made by Stark Industries specifically for programming code. I opened it up and checked what languages that it supported. C and C++ were supported, along with a few others I knew of, as well as a few I had never heard of before. I thought for a few minutes of what I would need and then started to code. First issue I ran into was my almost 2-year-old hands. They don't sit correctly over the keyboard, so typing is a lot slower than normal. This might take longer than I expected, at least 2 weeks, maybe even 3. But that is fine, I don't need to rush this. I honestly thought I would be in school before I had access to computers, so if anything I am ahead of schedule. The only thing I need to do is make a ghost drive to hide the programs I am making. Shouldn't be too hard to partition the main drive and then hide that from my mom and dad. They don't seem to be too tech-savvy. I was writing code for almost 6 hours before I stopped to make a ghost drive. Once the drive was set up, I saved all my work to it, then wiped all traces of my computer usage and shut it down. Once that was done, I made sure I moved the keyboard and chair back into place and then dismissed myself. Falling back against the couch, I shake my head a few times to clear it, then take a quick look around me. It seems like no one noticed my quick mental lapse. The rush of memories I just received was a lot more than I expected for only about 7 hours of time. I will definitely have to figure out a way around that issue. Maybe a data packet for my mind that I can ingest whenever I want, that way it won't hit me when I am not expecting it. Also, my clone pretty much did a play-by-play in his mind of everything he did, like he was narrating his own life. I hope my other clones don't do that. I take a few minutes to go over everything I just learned from my clone and smile slightly in satisfaction. My clone made a good decision when they changed plans after seeing the hardware we had to work with. My clones have about 3 weeks of work to do, but once I am done, I can start phase 1 of my plan for living in Marvel. The best part is I should be about 6 years ahead of my original schedule with this little windfall. I spend the rest of the day trying to figure out how to make a data packet for my clones. But I make no headway at all. I would have to remake the Shadow Clone Jutsu from scratch to add the functionality I want. It's after I am in bed that I have an idea. Instead of changing the Shadow Clone, change the way I receive their memories. There is no way I can change the way I receive the fatigue from my clones, but it is possible with the memories if I use my Mindscape. I begin by making a new server in my server room, which makes it appear in all my server rooms. Next, I dedicate it to only one task, pulling in all the memories of my shadow clones. Once done, it will quickly sort all of the information and then begin to feed it to me by matter of importance. This way, if there is something I need to know, I will know it right away. But the other less important things, or things that just don't matter, will still be ingested, but a lot slower and won't affect me. Like the memories of me writing code for 6 hours while I narrate exactly what I am doing. It takes me a good portion of the night to set it up and test it with mind clones, but it seems to be working correctly. The real test will come tomorrow when my clone dispels. I start to fall asleep with a content smile on my face, knowing that even though I am only getting 4 hours of sleep, I will still be well rested for tomorrow. This body is amazing. I can't wait to see how far I can push it when I'm older. Very few people in Naruto did actual weight training, and the ones that did were pretty powerful. I might even pull a Rock Lee at some point, leg weights for daily training, maybe even full body weights. If I could pull off a Rock Lee weights removal scene at some point, it would be peak youth. Maybe during the attack on New York? Oh man, I think I am being affected by Guy and Lee's enthusiasm for training. May the one above all help Peter if I become corrupted, for I currently have no one to save me from myself. The next afternoon when my clone dispelled, my memory server worked perfectly and there was no sudden weakness from receiving the memories. I did receive fatigue from my clone, but 6 hours of coding feels like nothing to this body. I do wonder what it will feel like when I am doing training with multiple clones and then dispel them. Things to worry about when I am older and have enough chakra to pull it off. For now, just starting phase 1 is the most important part.